What would you do if you were on a luxury flight and saw a millionaire humiliating a passenger just because of their appearance? That's exactly what happened. Except the despised person was none other than Steph Curry. And what happened next? No one on that plane will forget anytime soon. You'll understand why. But before I tell you what led to this moment, you need to understand who this millionaire was and why he thought he could look down on anyone on that flight. Delta Airlines, Flight 392, first class, from New York to San Francisco, was scheduled to depart at 7:45 in the morning. It was one of those luxury planes with seats that transform into beds, gourmet meals, and premium drinks, where every detail had been designed for the comfort of passengers willing to pay more than $4,000 for a ticket. Among the passengers that morning was Kevin Wright, 36 years old, CEO of Next Vision Tech, one of the fastest-growing technology startups in Silicon Valley. The man, almost 6 feet and 3 inches tall, dressed in a custom Italian suit worth $12,000, boarded the plane with the confidence of someone who had just closed a $50 million deal with Wall Street investors. "Excuse me, this is my seat," Kevin said to the flight attendant, pointing to seat 3A. While she checked his boarding pass, he impatiently fiddled with his gold Daytona Rolex, a $40,000 watch he had bought the previous week. "Correct, Mr. Wright. Welcome aboard. May I store your carry-on luggage?" "No, thank you. I prefer to keep my briefcase with me. It has important documents," he responded dryly, without even looking at the flight attendant as he organized his belongings. Kevin wasn't just a rich man. He was the type of person for whom money had become an identity. In just 7 years, he had transformed an app idea into a company valued at more than $800 million. But as his bank account grew, his humility diminished. At Next Vision, he was known for firing employees for minimal mistakes and for demanding impossible working hours. His former college classmates barely recognized him now, not just for his polished and expensive appearance, but for the arrogance he exuded. As he settled in, Kevin critically observed the other first-class passengers. An elderly couple, probably spending their grandchildren's inheritance, he thought. A middle-aged Wall Street executive, whom he recognized from a Forbes article. A Hollywood actress trying to go unnoticed beneath enormous sunglasses. First class was almost full when he arrived. Only one passenger was missing. It was at that moment that Steph Curry boarded the plane. The Golden State Warriors star wasn't dressed like a celebrity or an athlete who earns more than $40 million a year. He wore dark jeans, ordinary sneakers, a gray hoodie, and a simple Warriors cap pulled down low. He looked more like a college student returning home than one of the biggest stars in world basketball. Kevin, who didn't follow sports and prided himself on being too busy for entertainment, didn't recognize the man who walked calmly down the aisle. His eyes only caught the casual attire that, in his mind, didn't match first class. "Seat 3B, next to you, sir," the flight attendant said to Curry, who smiled politely and thanked her. Steph stored his small backpack in the overhead compartment and sat down next to Kevin, who immediately leaned back as if wanting to create more distance. "Good morning," Curry greeted him with a warm smile. Kevin responded with an almost imperceptible nod and turned his attention to the tablet in his hands, where he was reviewing financial presentations. The flight attendant came by offering champagne before takeoff, a courtesy for first-class passengers. "No, thank you. Just a glass of water, please," Steph requested. "I'll take the champagne. Dom Perignon, I hope?" said Kevin without taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes, sir. We're serving Dom Perignon 2008 today," replied the flight attendant. Kevin smiled with satisfaction, as if that confirmed he was exactly where he deserved to be. He took a sip and glanced at Curry's mineral water. "First time in first class?" Kevin asked with a slightly condescending tone. "No," Curry replied politely, without elaborating. Murmured Kevin. "I thought maybe it was. You seem a bit out of place." Curry just smiled, showing no sign of discomfort. "Everyone has their own style, don't they?" The plane began to taxi down the runway, and Kevin continued working on his tablet, occasionally casting critical glances at his traveling companion. For him, first class was a status symbol, and everyone should treat that space as such, which included dressing appropriately, in his opinion. What Kevin didn't know was that this out-of-place man beside him had, at that exact moment, a personal fortune greater than his and, more importantly, a humility that he had lost long ago. The plane took off, and as it climbed into the Manhattan skies, it was about to become the setting for a lesson that Kevin Wright would never forget. 30 minutes after takeoff, the atmosphere in first class was already established, with the drink service and the first offerings of appetizers. Kevin Wright had finished his first glass of champagne and was working on financial spreadsheets, occasionally interrupting his concentration to disapprovingly observe his seat neighbor. Steph Curry was quietly reading a book about leadership development, making some notes in a small notebook. His posture was relaxed, focused, oblivious to Kevin's glances. "More champagne, Mr. Wright?" asked a flight attendant. "Sure, why not? After all, that's what we pay for, right?" Kevin responded with a forced smile, raising his voice enough for other passengers to hear. Curry briefly looked at him and returned to his book. "And you, sir? Would you like something to drink now?" the flight attendant asked Steph. Before Curry could respond, Kevin interrupted. "Maybe he'd prefer something from economy class? A canned soda, perhaps?" And he let out a short laugh, as if he had made a brilliant joke. Some nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The flight attendant maintained her professionalism, but her smile became visibly tense. "Just an orange juice, please," Curry responded calmly, ignoring the comment. Kevin rolled his eyes theatrically and returned to his work, but was clearly bothered by the presence of someone he considered inferior in that environment. For him, first class was an exclusive sanctuary for people at his level. And, in his limited mind, that didn't include a black man dressed casually. When Curry's juice arrived, Kevin couldn't contain another comment. "You know, there's an unwritten dress code for first class," he said, leaning slightly toward Curry. "Some of us really work hard to be here." Curry placed his book on his lap and looked at Kevin with a serene, almost compassionate expression. "Sometimes, true luxury is being able to be yourself, regardless of where you are," he responded calmly. Kevin, interpreting the response as a provocation, became visibly irritated. "Sure, if being yourself means looking like you just walked out of a convenience store," he retorted, loud enough for several people around to hear. "Some places require a certain level. Not everyone can simply walk in here as if it were a public bus." The comment generated an instant silence in that section of the cabin. A woman in the opposite row widened her eyes, clearly shocked. A suited executive 2 rows ahead turned around, his face a mixture of surprise and recognition upon seeing Curry. Steph remained calm, taking a sip of his juice before responding. "You know what I learned playing basketball? The uniform doesn't make the player. It's the character you bring to the court that matters." Kevin, who hadn't caught the reference to basketball, interpreted it as a clumsy attempt at comparison. playing basketball? In your backyard, maybe? Look, friend, I don't think you understand. People like me pay a premium to not have to deal with—" He paused, gesturing vaguely at Curry's clothes. "Certain types of situations." At that moment, a girl of approximately 12 years old, who was sitting with her parents across the aisle, stood up and walked timidly toward them. Her parents seemed embarrassed, as if trying to stop her, but she was already in front of Curry. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "You're Steph Curry, aren't you? I'm your biggest fan. Can I have your autograph, please?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin Wright froze, his face quickly changing from irritation red to shock white. His eyes widened as he slowly processed who was actually sitting next to him. Not a casual intruder in first class, but Steph Curry, three-time NBA champion, two-time MVP, one of the most recognized and respected athletes in the world. Curry smiled gently at the girl. "Of course. What's your name?" "Sophia," she replied, handing him a notebook and a pen. "To Sophia, keep dreaming big. Steph Curry," he said aloud as he wrote. By this point, other passengers began to realize what was happening. Cell phones were discreetly raised. Kevin could feel the stares upon him, no longer of indifference, but of judgment and disdain. "Mr. Curry," said the flight attendant, approaching with a genuine smile, "it's an honor to have you on board. Is there anything special we can offer you during the flight?" "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," replied Curry. "You're all already doing an amazing job." Kevin cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. I didn't know. I'm sorry, I didn't," he stuttered, his face now red with embarrassment. Curry turned to him with an expression that showed no anger or triumph, just a quiet understanding of the situation. "It's not a problem if you don't recognize me," he said calmly. "But perhaps it's good to remember that a person's value isn't in the clothes they wear or the seat they're sitting in." The flight attendant walked away, and Sophia returned radiant to her seat, showing the autograph to her parents. Other passengers began to whisper, and Kevin could feel the narrative forming around him. He, the arrogant businessman, had just publicly humiliated one of the most admired people in American sports, a man known not only for his extraordinary talent, but for his humility and integrity off the court. "Mr. Curry," Kevin tried again, his tone completely different now. "I really apologize. That was very rude of me. I'm actually a big fan." The lie was so transparent that he couldn't even finish the sentence. Curry just nodded. "It's all right. We all have difficult days." And with that, he calmly returned to reading his book, leaving Kevin, sunk in his seat, surrounded by accusing looks and the soft sound of messages being typed on dozens of phones. The journey was only just beginning. The plane cut through the sky at 40,000 feet of altitude, but for Kevin Wright, it felt like he was rapidly sinking. The confined space of first class, which minutes before had seemed to him a sanctuary of privilege, had now transformed into an arena of judgment. Every look, every whisper seemed directed at him. Steph Curry had returned to bay, his reading with the same serenity as before, as if the incident hadn't happened. His ability to maintain composure only intensified Kevin's embarrassment. A flight attendant discreetly approached Kevin. "Mr. Wright, could you come with me for a moment?" Kevin followed her to the small service area at the front of the plane, feeling the gazes of the other passengers like needles in his back. "Sir, we've received some complaints about comments that were considered disrespectful," she said in a low voice. "Delta Airlines has a strict policy on mutual respect among passengers. We'd like to ask that you maintain cordial interactions for the remainder of the flight." It was a formal warning, packaged in professional language. But the message was clear. He was being watched now. "I understand. It won't happen again," Kevin responded, his throat dry. When he returned to his seat, he noticed that his phone was incessantly vibrating. Text messages and social media notifications were arriving in bursts. With a terrible presentiment, he unlocked the screen. The first message was from his public relations director. "Call urgently. We're seeing videos of you on the plane with Steph Curry. It's getting ugly." Kevin frantically began scrolling through Twitter. The hashtag Millionaire vs Steph was already trending. A partial video of the incident, recorded from an angle that made his comments even more deprecating, had more than 50,000 retweets in less than 30 minutes. One particularly viral comment said, "When you're so rich and so ignorant that you humiliate a sports legend without even knowing who he is." Class can't be bought. Meanwhile, across the aisle, an elderly lady began feeling ill during unexpected turbulence. Without hesitation, Curry stood up to help her, offering a glass of water and calmly talking to soothe her while the turbulence continued. The secret is to breathe deeply and remember that turbulence is like a tough game. It seems scary in the moment, but it passes. Kevin heard him say gently to the lady, who was now smiling despite her discomfort. The contrast couldn't be more evident to all present. On one side, the arrogant millionaire who judged people by their appearance. On the other, the humble superstar who stood up to help a stranger in distress. Kevin realized, with growing horror, that his carefully constructed reputation was crumbling in real time. Next Vision Tech had just launched a marketing campaign about innovation with purpose and values. What values were those now? His phone vibrated again. One of the main investors had sent a short and direct message. "We need to talk about the incident on the plane. Urgent." Meanwhile, Curry's interactions with the other passengers were natural and unpretentious. He briefly chatted with a boy about shooting techniques, gave reading tips to a college student, and genuinely thanked each crew member for their service. Kevin observed all this with a growing sense of shame that he had never experienced before. Curry's words reverberated in his mind. A person's value isn't in the clothes they wear or the seat they're sitting in. For years, Kevin had defined his value, and that of others, by exactly these superficial metrics. His house in Pacific Heights, his exotic cars, his designer clothes, his expensive watches, all the external symbols he used to show the world that he had made it. The flight attendant returned with a gourmet food plate for him, but Kevin could barely look at the meal. His appetite had disappeared. "Steph," he finally said, gathering courage after almost an hour of silence, "I truly am sorry for what I said. It was unforgivable." Curry turned to him with eyes that showed no anger, but a kind of compassionate understanding. "You know, in basketball, we make mistakes all the time," he replied. "Missed free throw, wrong pass, bad defense. What defines a player isn't never making mistakes. It's how they respond after the mistake." Kevin nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "I grew up in a family where my father always said that character is revealed not when everyone is watching, but in the small moments when we think no one is paying attention," continued Curry. "None of us is perfect, but we all have the chance to improve each day." It was a lesson that Kevin would never have expected to receive at 40,000 feet of altitude, from a man whom he had tried to diminish minutes before. "What do you think you should do now?" asked Curry, without any tone of judgment, but as a genuine invitation to reflection. Kevin looked at his phone, where notifications continued to arrive. Honestly, I don't know. My first reaction would be to call a crisis management agency, issue a press release, try to control the damage. Curry smiled slightly. That would solve the problem on social media. But would it solve the real problem? What would the real problem be? Asked Kevin, genuinely curious. The reason that made you feel you needed to diminish someone to feel important, Curry responded simply. Kevin felt as if he had been punched in the stomach, not out of anger, but truth. For the first time in years, someone had ignored his wealth, his position, and his power, and spoken directly to the man behind the facade. The plane began its descent to San Francisco International Airport, and Kevin Wright knew that when it landed, he would face a storm that his money perhaps couldn't muffle. San Francisco International Airport buzzed with the typical activity of a Friday afternoon. For most passengers, it was just another day of travel, but for Kevin Wright, it seemed like the entire terminal was waiting for his arrival. As the plane taxied to the gate, Kevin looked at Steph Curry, who was calmly putting away his belongings. "Will there be cameras waiting for you outside?" asked Kevin, anxiety evident in his voice. Curry gave an understanding smile. "Probably, but don't worry. It's not you they're looking for." But Kevin knew better. At that moment, his face was probably circulating on more screens than Curry's. When the plane doors opened, Kevin waited for all the other passengers to disembark first. It was a futile attempt to delay the inevitable. Steph was one of the last to leave, exchanging some friendly words with the crew. Before departing, he turned to Kevin. "Remember, every mistake is an opportunity to show who you really are." Kevin nodded, but the words seemed empty given the magnitude of what awaited him. Upon entering the terminal, the scene confirmed his worst fears. A small group of reporters and photographers waited in the arrival area, presumably alerted by passengers from the flight. Steph was immediately surrounded by fans asking for autographs and photos, handling the situation with his usual grace. Kevin tried to go unnoticed, keeping his head down, but it was useless. "Mr. Wright, is it true that you didn't recognize Steph Curry?" shouted a IT reporter. "Do you have any comment on the video that's circulating?" asked another. Kevin muttered a no comment and quickened his pace toward the exit, where his driver should be waiting. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. On the way to the limousine, he finally answered a call from Melissa Chen, Next Vision's public relations director. "Kevin, we're in total crisis mode here," she said without preamble. "The video already has more than 2 million views. CNBC wants a statement. 2 of our biggest corporate partners called concerned about brand association. We need you at the office now." The 40-minute trip from the airport to Next Vision headquarters in Palo Alto seemed like an eternity. Kevin compulsively scrolled through the online comments, each more devastating than the last. This is how tech billionaires really think when cameras aren't pointed at them. "My son idolizes entrepreneurs like Wright. After today, I'll make sure he has better role models." Next Vision talks about diversity and inclusion while its CEO humiliates people based on appearance. Upon arriving at the office, Kevin was immediately led to the conference room, where his executive team and crisis consultants awaited him. Expressions ranged from disappointment to pure panic. "We lost 8% of our stock value today," the CFO informed him bluntly. "And that's just the beginning if we don't resolve this quickly." For 4 hours, they debated strategies. The conventional approach, a formal apology statement, a substantial donation to a charitable organization, perhaps a temporary leave, was proposed. It was the standard playbook for public relations crises. But sitting there, listening to his team discuss how to manage the situation, Kevin felt a growing discomfort. Curry's words continued to echo in his mind. What defines a player isn't never making mistakes. It's how they respond after the mistake. "Stop," he finally said, interrupting a heated discussion about which platform to use for his statement. "I don't just want to manage this. I want to fix it." He took his phone and, to everyone's surprise, looked for Steph Curry's number. Not the public number or that of his management, but the personal one, which a mutual contact from the business world hesitantly provided him. "What are you doing?" asked Melissa, alarmed. "What I should have done from the beginning. Take responsibility, not as a CEO, but as a person," replied Kevin. The call went to voicemail, as expected. Kevin left a brief message, asking for the opportunity to talk personally, without cameras or advisors. In the days that followed, the media storm continued. Kevin refused all interviews and issued only a brief statement. "My behavior was unacceptable. I am taking time to reflect and make meaningful changes, not just in words." It was during this period that Kevin watched a recent interview of Curry on Good Morning America, where the player spoke about his charity, foundation that worked with disadvantaged children. "Everyone deserves to be seen for their potential, not their circumstances," Curry said in the interview. "When a child is judged by their appearance, by their zip code, or by their family situation, we are wasting the future." The words hit Kevin like lightning. For years, he had judged people exactly that way. Employees, strangers, and now Curry. In his pursuit of success, he had forgotten the basic lessons of humanity that his mother, a public school teacher in Chicago, had tried to teach him. 1 week after the incident, Kevin received a surprising message. It was from Curry's team, inviting him to a charity event at the Curry Foundation the following week. Not for a public appearance, but for a private conversation before the event. When the day came, Kevin arrived at the venue an hour early, without assistants or advisors. He found Curry in a quiet room at the back of the community center where the event would be held. "Thank you for seeing me," said Kevin, his voice trembling in a way he would never show in a $1,000,000 negotiation. "Everyone deserves a second chance," replied Curry, extending his hand. For almost an hour they talked, not about the incident, but about values, purpose, and the true meaning of success. Kevin listened more than he spoke, absorbing the wisdom of a man who, despite having achieved unparalleled fame and fortune, had never lost his connection to what truly mattered. "Do you know why I wear simple clothes when I travel?" Curry asked at one point. Kevin shook his head. "My father always said that true freedom comes when you don't need to prove anything to anyone. When I'm with my family, with friends, or even alone, I want to be just Steph, not Steph Curry from the NBA. Expensive clothes, cars, all that can be nice, but it can also become a prison if you think you need them to have value." When the event began, Kevin remained backstage, watching Curry interact with dozens of children from underprivileged neighborhoods. He saw how he treated each one of them with the same respect and attention he would give to a CEO or celebrity. It was then that Kevin made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew him. During the fundraising speech, he went up on stage, not as a scheduled guest, but because he asked Curry for the opportunity to speak. In front of hundreds of people and several cameras, Kevin Wright, the feared CEO known for his ruthlessness in the business, did something he had never done publicly. Admitted he was wrong. "2 weeks ago, I made a terrible mistake," he began, his voice firm despite the nervousness. "I judged someone based only on their appearance and believed that my financial success gave me the right to look down on others. I was deeply wrong," he continued, talking about his humble childhood in Chicago, how his obsession with success had transformed him into someone his teacher mother would barely recognize, and how the Oidua encounter with Curry had been a painful but necessary awakening. So today, I'm not here as a CEO or as a public figure trying to save his reputation. I'm here as someone who is relearning what it means to be a decent human being. To the audience's surprise, Kevin announced a personal donation of $5 million to the Curry Foundation, specifically directed toward mentoring programs that taught young people about character and values. More importantly, he announced a new initiative at Next Vision, a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program starting with a complete review of hiring practices and corporate culture, with an emphasis on valuing people for their skills and character, not external status markers. When he finished his speech, the initial silence was followed by a hesitant applause that grew until it became a respectful ovation. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time. But it was recognition of a sincere first step. Curry joined him on stage and shook his hand, a simple gesture that cameras captured and that would soon become as viral as the original incident. 6 months later, Kevin Wright was on another flight, this time in economy class on a commercial flight to Chicago, where he was going to visit a school in the neighborhood where he grew up. Next Vision had survived the crisis, albeit with scars, and was slowly rebuilding its reputation under a new corporate philosophy. The man sitting next to him recognized him. "Aren't you Kevin Wright? The guy from the video with Steph Curry?" Kevin nodded, preparing himself for the usual negative reaction. "I read about the changes you've been making at your company. My daughter got a scholarship through your new education incentive program. Thank you for that." Kevin smiled, genuinely touched. "Is your daughter enjoying the program?" "She's loving it. I never thought she would have an opportunity like this." As the plane took off, Kevin reflected on how his life had changed in the last few months. He was still a successful businessman, but now he measured his success differently. The most valuable lesson he learned on that flight with Steph Curry wasn't about how to publicly redeem himself, but about how to see people's value beyond appearances. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Curry with a photo. Him wearing a t-shirt with the logo of the joint educational initiative they had launched. Making a difference, one young person at a time. Thank you for turning a difficult moment into something positive. Kevin looked out the window, watching the city grow smaller below him. Ironically, it took being publicly humiliated for him to finally understand that true greatness wasn't in the height one reached, but in how one treated those met along the way. He put away his phone and smiled at the man beside him. "Would your daughter like to visit our headquarters in San Francisco someday? We could organize a special tour." "She would be delighted," replied the man, surprised by the offer. "Great," said Kevin, taking out a business card. "Tell her that what matters isn't where you start, but the journey you decide to make." They were words that, 6 months earlier, would have sounded empty coming from him. Now, each syllable carried the weight of lived experience and a lesson that cost his reputation but saved his humanity.